Hello and welcome to VesselBot's webinar, Decoding Maritime Emissions Q4 2025, Efficiency Peaks as Intensity Hits Yearly Low. I am Maria Bena, Communications Manager at VesselBot, and I'm pleased to welcome listeners from around the world. A few words about who we are. VesselBot is a technology company that bridges the gap between ambitious emissions targets and actionable execution strategies. We help logistics, sustainability, and supply chain professionals who have clear sustainability deadlines and targets, but need a roadmap to achieve them cost-effectively. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our speaker. Manos Charitos is the data analyst of VesselBot, where he spearheads the analysis of emissions data across global supply chains. With a strong background in mathematics and shipping, his expertise lies in analyzing and interpreting data in order to help companies understand the real impact of their transportation choices. Mano, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Maria. Hello, everyone. My name is Manos, and today we'll be discussing the key findings of our latest Decoding Maritime Emissions report. We will look at the general findings of the report, the key factors that shape well-to-wake emissions intensity, what changes at major fronthaul routes, and why carrier performance might vary on the same route. Among our key findings are that the emissions intensity of containers and voyages is at a 2-year low, larger vessels are more efficient, rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope persists, and carrier performance might vary up to 58% on the same route, as was the case in the China-East Asia to the Mediterranean route in the fourth quarter of 2025. Finally, at the end of the presentation, we'll analyze a case study we recently carried out. The aim of this case study was to compare the clean cargo methodology with our own methodology and calculations here at VesselBot. Our findings prove that relying on historical averages and assumptions leads to emissions miscalculation. Now, in 2025, we tracked in total more than 5,800 container-carrying vessels that carried out collectively more than 310,000 voyages. Their emissions in these voyages reached 208.8 million tons, with the transport work generated north of 2.9 trillion TEU kilometers. You can see on your screen the key figures for container voyages in the fourth quarter of the year. The average well-to-wake emissions intensity was 188.9 grams of CO2 equivalent per TEU kilometers. Those levels are the lowest recorded for both 2024 and 2025 on a quarterly basis. The average transit time was 3.3 days, while the average time spent in port was 1.4 days. The percentages you see on the right of the figures are annual differences. Now, utilization was 69%, while a vessel on average traveled a distance of 2,063 kilometers, carrying an average of 2,735 TEU.
Mano, I think it is important here to highlight that these are average figures. And if I understand correctly, on specific trades and routes, figures differ substantially compared to the overall averages for the quarter.
Exactly, Maria. And anyone aiming to make informed decisions requires that level of granularity and data on the actual execution of a voyage, not averages. Now, let's discuss what shapes the emissions intensity and therefore the efficiency of a voyage. It mainly goes down to a few things: vessel capacity and utilization, as well as voyage duration, distance traveled, and speed of the vessel. Vessel carrying capacity and utilization determine the number of TEU a vessel can carry. The rule of thumb is as follows: the more TEU a vessel carries and the closer it gets to its full capacity, the more efficient its voyages are. Why? Because emissions are allocated to more cargo. Now, transit time is affected by voyage distance and speed. Longer distances increase transport work and lower intensity. However, the rule of thumb is that voyages that cover distances closer to the minimum feasible distance required to complete the voyage are more efficient. And why is that? Because there is less fuel consumption and fewer port calls. Speed is a bit more complex as a factor. Vessel engines are designed to optimally operate within a specific range. When speed exceeds that range, fuel consumption and emissions increase, negatively impacting intensity. Moreover, the less time a vessel spends in port, the better. When a ship is in port, it continues to burn fuel and emit without generating any transport work. Therefore, the emission intensity increases. Now, earlier we claimed that larger vessels are more efficient, and let's discuss why. But first, let's break down exactly what emission intensity is it is grams of CO2 equivalent per TEU kilometers. Therefore, when in a voyage vessels carry more TEU and travel longer distances, which matches the operational profile of larger vessels, the TEU kilometer increase and the intensity decreases. Of course, larger vessels will emit more. However, the increase in emissions is relatively much smaller than the one recorded in the TEU kilometers. Now, for example, very large container ships carried an average of 14,405 TEU and sailed for 5,474 kilometers. Feeders, on the other hand, only carried an average of 1,050 TEU and traveled an average of 1,294 kilometers. The average difference in TEU kilometers was 5,704%. Overall, the average emissions intensity of feeders is 274% higher than the one of very large container ships. Now let's move on with trends in major routes. Now, out of the numerous different trades a vessel might be deployed on, four are considered today the most major ones for front-haul containerized trade. From China East Asia to Northern Europe, from China East Asia to the Mediterranean, from China East Asia to the west coast of North America, and from Northern Europe to the east coast of North America. There are many significant changes when examining those specific routes compared to when we look at all quarter voyages. The four most important ones are transit time, time spent in port, distance traveled, and utilization. Among these, let's focus a bit more on utilization. On these routes, vessel utilization ranged between 75% and 88% in the fourth quarter of 2025. However, methodologies such as clean cargo assume a flat 70% utilization on all routes, while other tools such as carrier online calculators typically assume full capacity utilization. Both approaches fail to grasp reality. Given the extent to which utilization affects emissions intensity, we understand how that leads to miscalculations.
Manos, allow me here to add something. This exactly highlights how data about the actual execution of the specific voyage that accounts for all distinct vessels and voyage characteristics is a necessity for shippers looking to optimize their supply chains and decarbonize.
Exactly, Maria. I completely agree with you. Thank you for the comment. As already discussed now, carrier performance varies across different routes. Indicatively, let's examine carrier performance for direct voyages between China East Asia and the Mediterranean during the fourth quarter of 2025. Our key findings are as follows. All voyages were relatively efficient, as the average well-to-wake emission intensity never crossed the 100 mark. It does not, however, mean that all voyages were equally efficient. For example, COSCO and Maersk had an average efficiency gap of 58% during the fourth quarter of the previous year. Moreover, alliance partners rank closely. The top alliance is the Ocean Alliance, with COSCO, Evergreen, and CMSGM occupying the first three spots of the ranking across all major carriers. Those three carriers also had the highest average utilization at 93% and 92%. Time and again, more loaded vessels carry out more efficient voyages. Another interesting note is that the time spent in ports significantly changes across carriers. This does not seem to be due to the TEU carried, as the changes across carriers are not that significant. Instead, it might be due to carriers giving priority to vessels they or their allies operate in terminals they manage. And now let's discuss and analyze the findings of the case study we carried out when we compared vessel boats calculations with the clean cargo methodology. The voyage we chose for the analysis was a three-leg voyage from Shanghai to Rotterdam. It was a schedule that was published by CMSGM, Evergreen, and COSCO for a voyage between Asia and Europe. The vessel was to first depart from Shanghai, call at Ningbo, then Singapore, and finally reach Rotterdam. Our execution grade voyage data revealed the following. The intensity of the voyage on the first leg was 50.01 grams of CO2 equivalent per TEU kilometers. This is 47% lower than what clean cargo assumes for the same leg. On the same leg, utilization was 56%, while clean cargo always assumed a flat 70% utilization. In the second leg of the voyage, the actual emissions intensity was 56% lower than what clean cargo suggested, and that would also lead to a 56% overestimation of the Scope 3 exposure shippers faced. And the third leg of the voyage, emissions intensity is actually 32% higher than what clean cargo suggests, and the Scope 3 exposure of shippers increased accordingly.
Mano, if I understand correctly, however, overall the clean cargo methodology overestimated the Scope 3 exposure of shippers by 8.5 kilograms per TEU transported, correct?
Exactly, Maria. Under our own calculations, the Scope 3 exposure of shippers is 1,011.7 kilograms per TEU transported, while under clean cargo, it's 1,020.2 kilograms per TEU transported. And we should expand a bit on the clean cargo methodology. Clean cargo relies on manual input regarding the distance the vessel traveled when computing the footprint of the voyage. This leads to most shippers that have access to such granular information to turn towards the minimum feasible distance required to complete the voyage. Why is that an issue? Well, ships heading to Europe from Asia don't typically cross the Suez Canal anymore. This voyage, as you will soon see on your map, with a green dotted line, did not cross the Suez Canal and opted for the longer and safer alternative route. Clean cargo methodology lost that information and underestimated the carbon footprint. Clean cargo aggregates information on a trade level basis, meaning that a direct voyage from Shanghai to Rotterdam will be attributed the same intensity as a direct voyage from Ningbo to Antwerp or a direct voyage from Yokohama to Hamburg. This approach is poised to lead to miscalculation of Super Scope 3 exposure. Clean cargo also relies on historical data about vessel voyages. When you are lagging 1 or 1.5 years behind current trends, it is impossible to reach informed strategic decision about the future of your supply chains. Clean cargo methodology is a useful tool for reporting, but a risky choice for decarbonization efforts and optimization strategies. Clean cargo does not account for voyage-specific characteristics, extraordinary events, port congestion, or weather conditions. Indicatively, the vessel idled outside the port of Ningbo for almost 36 hours, information that is not incorporated into clean cargo's aggregated historical data. Maria?
To conclude, this case study proves how crucial execution-grade voyage data is for shippers aiming to optimize their supply chain or decarbonize. Methodologies that rely on aggregate historical data are useful for reporting, but cannot become the basis for informed decision-making about a company's supply chain strategy. And with this, we conclude our presentation. Thank you, Manos, for the valuable insights, and thank you all for attending this webinar. Should you have any questions about the report or the case study, do not hesitate to reach out to us and stay tuned for the next webinar. Thank you.